there's just no benefit or no gain from not being a kind person. And trust me, I've seen a lot of unkind things happen around me. And I think through seeing that, I've been able to say that's not how I want to live my life.
What's your take on formal education now?
There's no playbook that you can really get from formal education that's going to prepare you for life. You just have to get out there and do it. Like, there was no sort of textbook way of like how to navigate Goldman Sachs as a 22-year-old.
Wow.
And so going back to the importance of having a story and purpose, it's not just this thing that you put on paper, but it creates connectivity with anyone who impacts your business. It creates this authentic connection that allows you to go from just selling a product to really selling something that has meaning and purpose.
Welcome back to Rise Podcast, Life Stories of Accomplished Individuals. Guys, thank you for joining us. I've taken a little bit of a different strategy with this podcast. As opposed to obligating myself to doing an episode once a week, I have decided that I am only going to do episodes when I meet people who I truly want to do episodes with. So if you don't see an episode for a couple of weeks or a month, understand that is the reason why. Not to say that my past guests haven't been amazing. They have been, but now my mandate isn't to fill a time slot once a week. It is when I come across truly fascinating people, like with Nancy, that is when I invite them to come into the show. Nancy, how are you?
Good. And I love that so much. I feel like it's quality over quantity, which is one of my goals for this year, saying no more.
Yes.
And being really selective about what I say yes to.
I love this concept of saying no more. I have to do it. I have to guard my calendar. To be totally honest with you, I'm getting so frazzled with all of the stuff that I know. I feel like 80% of my calendar, 80% of the stuff that I do, I shouldn't be doing.
Completely. And it's like, it's one of a few things. It's either you don't want to disappoint someone, so you're like, okay, let me figure out how I can do this. Or you feel like if you don't take the opportunity, you're going to lose out in some sort of way, which is kind of like the FOMO factor.
Well, I'm past the FOMO because with the kind of footprint, it's not even mine, it's Valeria's, quite honestly. Like, if we're telling the truth here, with Valeria's social media presence, as a proxy, I get invited to all these events because I'm always her plus one. It's tough, because it's so much and it's so heavy constantly all the time. It's like a completely different skill set to know what to say no to.
Totally.
Because you still have to identify what to say yes to. And that's but it's the same thing. It's the same thing with you.
Yeah.
It's the same thing with you. I want to jump into, so people understand, who it is that I'm talking to. I have a little brief explanation, a little bit of intro here that I have for you. So Nancy graduated, I never know if I say this right, summa cum laude?
Summa cum laude. Honestly, I don't.
Laude.
Yeah,
it just means
too.
It means you're at the top of your class, right?
Correct.
Got it.
Yes.
Okay, so Nancy graduated top of her class. Okay, from UVA's McIntyre School of Commerce with a Bachelor of Science in Finance.
Yes.
She then went on to be, no big deal, a VP at Goldman Sachs for 7 years. Before leaving at the age of 29 to become the founder and CEO of Briogeo Hair Care. Less than 10 years later, Briogeo is now a 9-figure enterprise. And about 2 years ago, Nancy sold Briogeo to now parent company Wella. So I want to point out to those who didn't get that, 9 figures is 100 million plus. Is my math correct?
Your math is mathin'.
Yes, I know my math is correct. So you are the founder and CEO of Briogeo. And it's interesting because when I come across people and I mention that I know you, and they might not know yet when I mention your name, but as soon as I say Briogeo, they're like, oh, really?
Yeah.
So I do my fancy name dropping with you.
Thank you.
Nancy's been featured in Today, Harper's Bazaar, BET, Women's Wear Daily, Inc. Magazine, Nylon, Forbes, InStyle, Women's Health, Fast Company. I'm getting tired reading this. Business of Fashion, and many, many more. Nancy is also an active investor. To my count, what I saw on your website, in approximately 16 startups.
Oh, it's more than that now.
Okay.
It's like a few dozen.
A few dozen. And so you are your own, I guess, venture capitalist, angel investor.
Totally.
You come in mostly at startup stage?
Startup primarily. So typically seed, Series A, maybe some Series B.
And you're staying within the kind of beauty wellness. And then I saw fintech as well.
Yeah. So it's interesting because I'm in the beauty space. I'm actually a little oversaturated in beauty consumer brands because that's what comes to me primarily. Yeah. So I'm trying to get more into tech, specifically AI.
Why? Just because it's hot right now?
Well, I think it's hot right now, but I just think it's where the future is going. And for me, I actually have a ChatGPT tab open in my browser every single day.
Me too.
I use it for like so many different things, and it's transformed how I work. And the thing is, it's still so early. It's like the early days of Google when we had access to search and we never knew how big it would get and how dynamic it would get. I think the same thing is true for AI.
When AI first hit the scene, specifically ChatGPT, so I'm the same way. I have the tab open on my desktop. I have the app on my phone. It's constantly waiting. Yeah. And I told our team, I told our CEO and Valeria, I said, AI, and from what I'm seeing, this format, this is going to be as impactful, if not more, than the internet was when it started in like the early 90s.
Completely.
That's how big this is going to be. And Sam Altman, I believe his name is, he's the founder of OpenAI. And he's like, I think the father of AI. If I had to like name a father, it would be Sam Altman. He said ChatGPT 4, he said ChatGPT 5 will be far better than ChatGPT 4, and ChatGPT 6 will be far better than ChatGPT 5. So he is predicting a very aggressive curve. Yeah. And I'm telling you, like, when I go into it and I get it to do stuff for me, I'm blown away. And I see it learning and I see it getting better and better. It's wild.
Totally. And I think what I love about it too is that it frees up my time to do the things that I'm really good and really qualified to do. Yes. So all of just like the admin things or, it taking 30 minutes to draft this email because I want to be thoughtful, I can speed through things and it just gives me the time that I need to do the really important stuff. And I think when more people can do that from just like a mass productivity perspective, that's why I'm so like bullish the world and the economy with all of this.
I agree with you 100%. Like to me, it's the fact that I can go in and instead of doing all of the work, I write a prompt where I don't have to think about the grammar. I don't have to think about, I just have to really, like my prompts are really thorough and I'll put in really thorough prompts and then whatever it spits out, I'll edit. So now my time, if it would have taken me, let's say 3 hours to draft something meaningful, I can make a prompt in 5 minutes and I can edit for 15. So now 3 hours turns into 20 minutes and the resulting output is a combination of AI and me, a human, creating it. So it's actually superior to what the 3-hour product would look like.
Completely.
So that's where I'm at with AI.
Yeah.
So I'm glad you and I are on the same page. I agree with you. In case you weren't busy enough, you were also the host of, I believe, your new podcast, Maker's Mindset.
Yes.
Take me through that really quick.
Yes. It's really interesting. I sold my business in 2022 for almost a decade. I was such a heads down entrepreneur, meaning I was so focused on my business that I really wasn't seeing what was going on around me. And what was going on around me was that there were so many people who I'm connected to that were looking to do things similar to me. They were looking to start businesses for the first time, not even just in beauty. And I thought like, wow, I've learned so much over the past decade and I've gotten to a place of success. I need to figure out how I can help show other people the way. And so it started as a content site on nancytwine.com where I have over 100 articles just talking about like common topics that any startup entrepreneur needs to know about. How to create a pitch deck, how to hire your first executive. And it got to a point where I was thinking like, sure, I have a lot of experience, but so do so many other incredible women in my network who have also scaled businesses. So creating the podcast gives me the opportunity to bring on other minds and perspectives and give them a platform to help just continuing, to cultivate learning and sharing and resources for the generations of entrepreneurs that are, coming up now.
That kind of leads me to my next question. And I don't want to embarrass you with my next question, but I think I might embarrass you a little bit. Nancy, you're super accomplished. Like you're super accomplished. Like Briogeo is a monster business. Before that, you were an executive at Goldman's. However, unlike most people at your level of success, you are, and again, this might embarrass you. You are so lovely. No, you really are. And when before I met you, Valeria said to me, she came home and she was so excited that she had met you. She mentioned Briogeo and she said, Nancy, who's the founder and the CEO, and she's like, Gary, you don't understand. Like, she's so nice. Like, she's so awesome. She's such a kind person. And you and I then met. Valeria wasn't around. You and I met at a dinner, at a friend's birthday dinner, at a mutual friend's birthday dinner. And you said, hi, my name's Nancy, and you were so nonchalant. In any case, I guess really my question to you is, and now you're giving back to your community of entrepreneurs. My question to you is, with all of this, like, how have you stayed so grounded? And I feel like you are the same person that you were 15 years ago before you even became an entrepreneur.
Yeah, well, first of all, that is so kind of you to say, and I really appreciate that so much. I'm just a big believer in, you attract what you are. And I've always felt like there's space for everyone. So I've never been the type of person to have like a scarcity mindset. Like, I've got to keep this to myself because I don't want someone else getting an edge. And I'm just kind of like, there's just no benefit or no gain from not being a kind person. And trust me, I've seen a lot of unkind things happen around me. And I think through seeing that, I've been able to say that's not how I want to live my life. Because when you work so hard to get to a place of success, ultimately what really brings you joy are the people that you have around you and the community that you get to spend your time with. And so for me, like, happiness is not just about, money or having things, but it really is like cultivating a community of joyful, awesome people around you. And the only way you can do that, truthfully, is being a kind person.
So I have a follow-up question to that. And I think this isn't something that is really talked about with entrepreneurs, especially ones at your level. Being, having the demeanor that you do and being the way that you are with people, once they find out your accomplishments, do you find that because you are the way you are, that people mistakenly, maybe they mistake your kindness for maybe somebody they could take advantage of? And do you feel like you have to guard yourself against those kind of situations?
With some people, I would say for the majority, I haven't felt that way, but there are definitely some people where I do get the sense that they're going to keep pushing until they get what they want ultimately. But I'm also the type of person where I'm like kind to a point, because I also don't believe in being walked over or taken advantage of. So if I sense that and I truly believe that that's your character, I have like no problem like cutting you out of my circle.
Yeah.
So that's how I think about it.
But you have a pretty good radar for it.
I have a really good radar for it.
Okay.
Yeah, for sure.
Okay, well, I mean, you have to develop that. That's something that has to be there. Talk to me about kind of your early life. Where are you from?
So I grew up in Long Island, New York, and I went to school in Virginia, which was like a whole different cultural, experience for me. And then I moved to New York City after I graduated to start my finance career. And now I'm in Miami. So I've really lived like 4 places in my entire life.
Wow. And so, going to school, like, what was was it assumed you were going to go and go into for formal education, like actually get a degree at a university? Was it assumed by your parents? Did your parents go to university? Yeah,
so they both did. And my mom too, who, she was a Black female at the time. It was so rare to get, a college degree, an MD and a PhD.
Oh, wow.
Which is like pretty crazy. My dad went to university. So I think one of the biggest values that my parents instilled in me, which is also one of my biggest values, is the power of education. It wasn't even a question whether or not I would go to school. Okay. It was just that was just the path.
And not to get too political, because I mean, I'm sure online, like, there's all these debates about formal education. I think it's changed a lot. I think getting, And there's data out there that says that something like 50% of the people who graduate, they don't actually use their degree for anything. They don't.
Yeah.
So what's your take on, so you didn't go to university that long ago in the grand scheme of things, but what's your take on formal education now? Like, what are you thinking?
Yeah, it's interesting because I feel like for me, like there's no playbook that you can really get from formal education that's going to prepare you for life. You just have to get out there and do it. Like there was no sort of textbook way of like how to navigate, Goldman Sachs as a 22-year-old.
Wow.
But I feel like the formal education gave me something to strive for. And I feel like part of preparing you for success is learning how to have a goal, which is, in my instance, to go to university, to figure out the process by which you do that, to work really hard and to focus on it and accomplish it. So I think for me, getting into school was like the first real milestone that I had. And whether it was going into university or something else, I think it really is important for kids to have something massive that they're working towards and to be able to do that independently.
And how did your parents, it sounds to me like it was almost like through osmosis, but how did your parents like instill in you this kind of early goal of you have to get into a good college, you have to go to school? Like you said, it was kind of a given. Like there was no, considering how highly educated both your parents are, it wasn't like,
yeah.
Was it by example? They kind of led by example?
Yeah, it was a bit of that. And then I just literally felt, even though this isn't the case, I felt that in order to be whatever it was I wanted to be ultimately, that I had to go to school. I felt like education was like the gateway for endless possibilities. And the idea of endless possibilities was something that was really attractive to me. Like, I can do anything if I go to school. And really? Again, that's what I thought.
That's the way it was presented to you by parents. If you go to school, I like that. I'm going to use that on my 3 children. And if I may ask, you stopped at a bachelor's degree. You didn't do a graduate degree.
I didn't. And now it's so funny because so many of my friends have grad degrees. And now I feel like in certain circles, like the least educated.
Oh, come on.
I know, but like certain circles, we're like,
like the academics.
School and lawyers and PhDs. Yeah, the academics.
Yeah, but you have enough of them who work for you, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Right. So so you finished university, you went off to be a VP at Goldman. I'm sure you didn't start as a VP at Goldman. I'm assuming you worked your way up.
I worked my way up, and it was actually a really challenging time to be starting at Goldman. It was 2007. So before the start of the financial crisis, I had so many friends who were getting laid off. And I mean, I was working 7 days a week. I was the first person in, first person out. I was one of the few women of color, maybe even the only woman of color on a trading floor. I mean, it was a crazy experience.
Nancy? How was that? The reason I ask is because Valeria recently, about 2 months ago, she interviewed a woman named Vivian too.
Oh yeah, I know. Vivian,
And so Vivian was talking about, she's Asian American, and she was talking about, I forgot where she was at. I don't know if it was Goldman, but it was like she was on a trading floor. And she was really talking about how difficult it was. And one of the things that inspired her was that there was another woman who was like in a very senior role who was also Asian American. And that was like a catalyst for her too. So she had like a relatively positive experience because of the circumstances. What was your experience being, as you mentioned, a woman of color on the trading floor at Goldman Sachs? Like, how did you find that?
Well, yeah, I mean, Vivian's story is really interesting, especially that last point, because I really believe that seeing is believing. And when you see someone who looks like you doing the thing that you want to do, it builds your confidence and it helps you believe that it's possible. But I didn't have that. There were no other like senior successful Black women in sales and trading at Goldman that I could mirror that after. So you have to somehow figure out like and build your confidence that you do belong, even though you don't see yourself.
But did you feel like you didn't belong because of that?
I mean, during the early days, I felt like I didn't belong for a lot of different reasons. I think one of the biggest reasons actually was like I had no one in my family that worked in finance before. And like there were kids around me that knew about like options and equity trading and like, oh, I went to my, I worked at my dad's office one summer and like I had none of that. So I feel like I was just going into this thing too that was so foreign in so many ways. And you do get into this situation, and I actually tell people not to do this, but I was in a situation where I had to like fake it until I made it.
Why finance? Because it sounds to me, you said your mother was she was a medical doctor.
Yeah, she was a medical
And a
doctor.
PhD.
Exactly.
And your dad was also a PhD.
He was in the Air Force.
Your dad was in the military.
Lieutenant Colonel in the Air Force.
Okay,
So
wow.
very different.
So, okay, what I'm trying to pinpoint and what I want the audience to get from this is, how do you forge your path? So you've got very kind of two very polarizing ends with your folks, right? With your parents. You've got your dad in the military. Your mom is a PhD and an MD. You decide to go to university and get a degree in finance. And now you're working at Goldman Sachs in finance. Yeah. So very different. You didn't go either route.
Totally.
What was the catalyst? What was that aha, that turning point moment that got you to go to finance?
Completely. And it's funny because we were just talking about Scott Galloway, and one of the things that he talks about is when you're starting your career, don't chase your passion, chase what you're good at.
Right.
And not knowing Scott Galloway, essentially that's what I did. Like, I knew that I was good with numbers. And even when I was in high school, I actually had like these little side hustles where I would like make different items and crafts and jewelry, and I bring them in and sell them to students. And that's how I had like money to pay my car payment. And like, I was very entrepreneurial. When I was in college, I had an online jewelry business. I was sourcing pearl jewelry from Asia. And then I would get custom colors to sell to sororities. And like, I was so wired, this idea of like mirroring creativity with commerce.
Yeah.
And when I went to school, there wasn't an entrepreneurism major. The closest thing to it was finance. And I knew that I was good with the numbers and the business side. So I did something that I felt like I was good at. But then obviously the world of finance is so broad. There's so many ways that you can go. You can be an accountant. You can be an investment banker. I had interned at Goldman Sachs for 2 summers, and I just happened to get a full-time position in sales and trading. But I don't think I was necessarily good at it. I had to learn it, leveraging the things that I was good with, which was numbers.
Okay.
Yeah.
I just want to back up for a second. You had mentioned that you had this jewelry business. I want to dig into that a little bit, because to me that is foreshadowing what happened with Briogeo. So when you got into that, you were in school. Like, this was in school that you were doing this?
I was at UVA.
You were at UVA.
Yeah.
So you mentioned something that I found just really intriguing right now, and you talked about your fascination with combining the creative with finance, right? And that's
left brain, right brain,
right.
Yeah,
and that's a hard thing to do. That's like, for me, working with Valeria and working with our team, and we have a number of people who work with us, and Valeria and I are far more on the creative side, and so we have people who, quite frankly, handle us.
Yeah.
How are you able to develop both of those? Do you think it's a natural, innate ability that you have, because both of them is difficult and it's rare?
Yeah, it is natural. It is innate, but it's a gift and a curse. And the reason why it's a gift and a curse, it's a gift because you can see the full picture of things. You can see how something is going to come to fruition, both from like an ideation perspective, but then also from, like I said, a commerce perspective. But where it gets you into trouble is that you're capable of doing everything for your business. So probably for longer than I should have, I was playing all of these different roles because I could, but I probably really should have brought on team members a lot sooner to help me with those things.
Yeah, but at the end of the day, you did it within 10 years and you got to the scale that you did. So you obviously did something right. It's interesting. I have a friend who recently sold his SaaS company. He did really well with it. And I remember, and he did it in about 9 years, and he had a really meaningful exit. And I remember when he was like halfway through it, and I saw he was working his 14-hour day, still doing everything himself. And I said, "You're crazy. You should really hire like a CTO, a CMO, like whoever it is." And he's like, "Nope." And he was doing it all himself. So was that the case with you as well? You were for a long period of time doing it
for a long period of time. I was doing so many things on my own. And I think part of it too, it's like, when you're scaling a business, things are happening so quickly, and the hiring process takes a lot of time.
It does.
You can't just hire anyone. Trust me, I know. I've made that mistake. And you've got to be really thoughtful about it. And I will tell you that hiring and org structure is probably not my strong suit. And so anyway, you know, I was doing so much on my own that if I had brought in really talented people a lot sooner, we could have scaled the business a lot quicker, a lot bigger than we did. I mean, it was still at the end of the day successful.
Or not. Or it could have been the wrong hire without, on the surface before they started, would have looked like the correct person who would have threw a monkey wrench into it and completely destroyed it. So, you know, but I want to step back a little bit, and I want to understand, because I want to dig into Briogeo, but I want to step back and understand the transition between the corporate job and deciding to become an entrepreneur. So how did that happen? You're 7 years into it. You're now a VP. You're seasoned. I'm assuming you're doing very well financially. Probably still working crazy hours because you're still very young.
Yeah.
So they had you, you know, working. I mean, I have a friend who's I forgot where he's at. JP
Morgan?
JP Morgan.
Yeah.
He's at JP Morgan and he works crazy hours. He's a trader. So talk to me about that transition. Why did you decide to become an entrepreneur? Because the only experience you had as an entrepreneur prior to that was 7 years earlier, probably closer to 8-9 years earlier while you were at college with your jewelry site. So you still remembered that period of, you know, that period in your life, and you said you wanted to become an entrepreneur. So you're at Goldman's, you're doing great, you're now stable, you're young, and you decide, I'm going to throw this away and I'm going to go down this completely very risky path into what I think at the time, and probably still is, a very crowded market.
Yeah.
Saturated. So can you talk to me about how this transition happened?
Yeah, completely. So actually halfway through my career when I was at Goldman, I lost my mom really suddenly.
Oh, I'm sorry. I didn't know.
Yeah. And that was a huge turning point for me because it was the first time that I had lost anyone I was close to in my entire life. And it was the first time that I realized that life could be so short and we owe it to ourselves to spend our lives doing something that we really, really care about. And that's the tough thing about doing what you're good at. What you're good at isn't always what you love.
Yeah.
But for some people, it starts out doing what they're good at, and then they get so good at it that they become passionate about it because it's opened up, you know, this incredible life for them. That wasn't the case with me. I was good at it, but I wasn't feeling fulfilled. And I ended up taking some time off from work, and I really just went on this soul-searching journey to figure out, like, what brings me joy, what makes me happy. And growing up, my mom was a physician and a chemist, and with her chemistry background, we actually used to make so many of our beauty products at home in our kitchen.
Oh, wow.
So we would go to our local health food store, and we would buy all sorts of oils and extracts and butter, shea, and different nut butters. And we would bring them home, and, you know, my mom knew how to emulsify water and oil and create different phases to create different, you know, textures and formulas. And we were literally making these very, like, basic but effective, customized beauty products at home. And I loved doing that so, so much. But the thing was, I didn't have a background in chemistry. And I started thinking more too, because, you know, I've always been a big beauty consumer. And there was this shift that was starting to happen in beauty for the first time. You were starting to see clean beauty products pop up on shelf, which now, obviously, the market is so saturated with them. But this was back, you know, this was almost 14 years ago at this point. And I said, wow, I think that this is not going to be a trend. This is where beauty is headed, because similar to food, you know, when people became more aware of what they were ingesting, they started becoming more smart about their diets. And that's been a movement. It hasn't been this short-lived thing. And so I basically started spending my nights and weekends at Goldman, pouring myself into this passion project, which was ultimately Briogeo. And I found a cosmetic chemist that helped me develop my first 4 formulas. I found a creative agency that helped me with my packaging. And after several months, a few years, I had my first 4 products. Like,
how long did it take you to get from the idea to the actual product in hand?
So it took about 2.5, 3 years because I wasn't working on it full time.
I understand. So it's interesting because you went into clean beauty because of this experience, this personal experience with your mom. So it's fascinating to me because it's not, you didn't make this necessarily. I mean, I'm sure you looked into feasibility and like the addressable market.
I did. I did all the research and everything.
But the genesis of it was this experience.
Totally. And I think that is really important. You know, entrepreneurs have different reasons for wanting to start businesses. But I'm like, if your business is purely to make money or because you saw someone have a crazy exit and you think you can do it too, that is not enough to, one, motivate you to keep going through all of the inevitable challenges that you're going to face as an entrepreneur. Yeah. But it also is hard to like root a real story in that. And at the end of the day, especially when you're selling a product, you're selling a story. Like, I got my products into Sephora and Ulta because of the story. I converted customers into Briogeo because of the story. And so I think that's...
story, I apologize. You're talking about specifically the story with your mom.
And the purpose and the why, yeah.
And you were able to, and you continue to articulate that story at all points when you're getting into retail.
Oh, totally. Because everyone asks me, like, you're not a hairstylist. Why are you starting a hair care brand? Everyone always wants to know. And I tell them the story and they're like, wow, like that really spoke to me. Or, wow, that was so inspiring.
How were you able to convey that story along the way? So if I understand correctly, let's say you're meeting with Sephora, you would explain this story with your mom. Yeah,
I would. I mean, I've told this story like hundreds of times.
And what was their response? Because I'm sure that they're hearing all kinds of pitches, right? They're hearing all kinds of pitches that are heavily, immersed in data, which I'm sure yours was as well, in addition to the story. But do you feel that that gave you an edge, that personal connection and your ability to convey it?
Totally. So I always tell entrepreneurs too, like, you have to have your pitch down. You have to be able, it's the 3 C's. You have to be able to clearly, concisely, and compellingly tell your story. It's so, so important. And I think for the case of Sephora, and this is true with other retailers, like Sephora doesn't just sell products, they sell brands.
Yes.
They sell connections, they sell emotion. And that's a big part of why I think Briogeo was interesting to them. Obviously, you have to have a good product, you have to have a good formula, you have to address a need, but there was heart and soul behind it. And I think that there's a physics to heart and soul, because it's not easy scaling a business in Sephora. Like, it's one thing to get in, but it's another thing to really create a business with them.
To get the products off the shelf. I heard that it's one thing to get in, which is a massive hurdle to get in.
Right.
But then it's getting the products off the shelf.
Sell through.
Right.
You have to sell that. And connectivity is everything. Like, early on, one of our biggest, movers of growth was when we started taking a bet on influencers. And this was like... I
was hoping you'd say that.
Yeah, no. But truly, I actually remember I was at like a Sephora market meeting and they put like this deck in front of me. And I guess they were giving this deck out to all their brands. But it was like how to win on YouTube with beauty influencers. And it just had like all these case studies for these like brands that had like huge success. And our original lever of driving growth was sampling, and we were doing a lot of that because it was the early days of like Birchbox and FabFitFun, and that was huge for us. But at some point it started to taper off and we had to figure out, okay, what's going to be like our next big momentum driver? And I was like, there must be something to this. If they handed me this deck and there's pages and pages of case studies. And so I ended up reaching out just personally to several of these influencers who were in this deck, but also had organically talked about Briogeo before, because I think that's really, really important, especially if you're going to pay an influencer. I love it when an influencer has already been using your brand and has been talking about your brand. And one of our biggest influencers, her husband actually wrote me back and said, so-and-so is not really doing paid partnerships right now because she's focused on her own brand, but she really likes Briogeo. But it's really important that we meet with you. Would you be willing to fly to LA for a meeting? And I was like, you know what? I actually really like that, because this is probably going to cost me a lot of money more than I've ever spent for marketing. And I just want to make sure that like these people are legit and this is the right thing. So anyway, I fly up.
I remember now. We talked about this over the lunch, so I remember who it is. But
totally.
Yeah.
So I fly out to LA and I have this lovely like meeting at their home, and I told them my story. And this influencer started to tear up and said, "Nancy, I cannot wait to work for you. Your products are amazing. And your story like really inspired me. I'm so excited to work with you." And I'm sure when she created her content, it wasn't just, oh, I have this content deliverable, let me pump this out. It was like, no, I really want to do right by Nancy, and I want this to be successful. And so going back to the importance of having a story and purpose, it's not just this thing that you put on paper. It's not just this thing that can create connectivity with your consumer, but it creates connectivity with anyone who impacts your business. It creates this authentic connection that allows you to go from just selling a product to really selling something that has meaning and purpose. And there are just countless stories that I can relate back to that really underscore the importance of doing something that's rooted in purpose and not just doing it because you're chasing the dollar.
Yeah, no, absolutely. But there's a flip side to that, and I don't want to be like the one. I'm often the one that rains on the parade, on hilarious parade, because she is 1,000% like you, where it has to be rooted in purpose, and she really scrutinizes not only the partners but the type of content that she makes, and a lot of the times she'll say no to partners. She did it recently, but. And she'll say no to partners. Well, actually, relatively often she'll say no, even though it's there's the business feasibility. So I have to often bring her back to the reality of that this it is a business.
Yeah.
And then with content, for the most part, now the organic content she makes is all she wants to make it.
Yeah.
But early on, we had to make certain content that we knew would drive the KPIs. They weren't off-brand.
Yeah.
But she wasn't passionate about them, right? So to your point, yes, you do have to root it in passion and purpose. But on the flip side of it, like, did you find it difficult to then balance it off against feasibility as well?
Yeah.
Or did you find that by always pursuing your purpose, the feasibility would come?
Yeah, it is a great, great question. And I think in an ideal world, always letting your purpose and mission guide every single decision would be like business utopia.
Right.
But the truth is, like, we don't live in utopia.
Right.
And there comes instances in which you have to make those tough decisions that may be slight compromises to your vision. But if you don't do it, it could have like huge implications.
Right.
And it's really striking that balance. I think, 8, 9 times out of 10, you have to stick with your vision and purpose. But life and anything, right? There's going to be some compromises.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I just want to take a pause for a sec. I wanted you to know that I know you hear Jake coughing.
Yeah.
These are directional mics. It's not picking it up.
Oh, perfect.
Just so you know. I just didn't want you to be distracted by that.
Yeah.
It's interesting when you're talking about influencers. I like to dig into this because I have a special interest in this and the way the market's going. Outside of the large influencer that you're talking about, was Briogeo, like, how much of Briogeo was built on influencers, like in aggregate, all influencers? Like, is that something you can comment on?
Yeah, I mean, a big part of our marketing strategy, even today, so much of it is influencers. I mean, influencers have really revolutionized the way that brands advertise, especially in the beauty space.
Yes.
And other just like consumer goods spaces, especially. Because when you think about it, it's like, especially when you follow influencers that you trust because they have values linked to who they partner with, you're getting a review that's credible. You're getting a tutorial on how the product works.
Yeah.
You're getting, assets. You get to see what it looks like in real environments. You're getting education. You're learning about it's everything in one that you don't really get from traditional advertising.
I agree. I mean, I obviously agree. I'm very biased with it. In terms of influencers, I just want to stick with that for a bit. Hold on, what was my next question? Give me just a second. In terms of like going in short term versus long term, in our business, what we're seeing, just to compare notes on our business, we're seeing there are brands who come in, and big brands too, which is surprising to me, and they want to make it transactional. So it's very kind of the opposite of what you're talking about. They want to make it transactional where they're like, we want one deliverable, and then we're going to measure KPIs and take it from there. And so my explanation to them is always, we'll do that. We're happy because we're not going to refuse that business. However, there's multiple parts of the funnel, right? There's top of funnel when they're learning the consumer, like the funnel is in regards to the customer's journey, right? There's the top of the funnel where they're learning about you for the first time. There's mid funnel where you're building affinity. You're explaining to them why your product is what you claim it is, why it's good, and why you should engage with it. And then bottom of the funnel is that conversion. And I'm finding so many companies, which is so surprising to me, is that they continue to look at influencers as a list against which to arbitrage, right?
Right.
And it's strange. Just today we had someone who reached out and said, your piece of content went up. It's been up for 3 hours and we've only done $5,000 in sales. And I'm just like, you tracked it back through a link. You've done $5,000 in sales, and you're ignoring the fact that you've gotten 100,000 impressions, meaning you've reached 100,000 accounts. This is within hours. So I guess it's strange to me, but then there's people like yourself, and I guess I'm taking advantage right now of you a little bit because I'm using you as a case study, because when you describe the relationship where you went to go and fly to meet this influencer and you engage in this long-term relationship, you probably did that for an extended period of time with that person, probably for years. And then and then it grew and it helped to grow the business. So it's just interesting how marketers now, they're still kind of in this transactional phase. Again, big companies were just like, we're just going to do one and kind of take it from there.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's just a lot of, you hear a lot about like test and learn, you got to be quick and test and learn. And for certain things, I think that makes sense. Like if you're doing Facebook ads and you're testing some creative, as soon as you find out the creative doesn't work, you like pivot because you're testing and learning. But I do think with, influencers, sure, there is some aspect of testing and learning. But if you really know who your core client is and you're making a bet on an influencer because you've really analyzed their audience, you've assessed that it's a right fit for your consumer, you understand their values, there's a longer term play. You can't test and learn as quickly as you would in a Facebook environment. Yeah. And I think that's where some people mess it up, My hope is that they're evolving. Like, whenever somebody wants to do a one piece of content, what I equate it to is it's a media hit, meaning it's something, it's not a campaign. You can compare it to, let's say, getting an article in Forbes. Right. Having a feature written about you. The only difference is it'll be seen by a lot more people when an influencer at scale does it. Did you also work with smaller influencers? Did you do like a lot of gifting and a lot of seeding? Oh, yeah. And we still do that too. We do, for all of our new launches, we, do sustainable mailer campaigns because we're mindful of, waste that comes with that. But yeah, I mean, there's so many different ways to sort of tailor your strategy depending upon the group of influencers, individual influencers. And we try to be like really prescriptive about it. Yeah, that's great. I want to switch gears and I want to talk a little bit about business challenges. People think that being an entrepreneur is this glamorous thing. And quite frankly, looking at you, it does look like it's a glamorous thing, but they're looking at the end result. Yeah, right. Of course. They haven't seen the last, 10 years of what you went through. As an entrepreneur, and I like to ask this of seasoned entrepreneurs, what is your coping mechanism? Because things happen, and sometimes they happen really often, and there's not a lot of times when things go smoothly, and it's always, the data is tracking up and up and up,
in terms of revenues and, all the other data that you look at, and everything's great. And investors keep saying, oh, we're happy. So, you're nodding because, I've been down this road.
Yeah.
You continue to go down this road. What is your coping mechanism? How do you get through this?
So I'll tell you, in the beginning, I did not have a coping mechanism, and it was really, really, really hard. Those were, there were just definitely some very dark days.
Yeah.
I didn't have a co-founder, so I was absorbing.
Oh, sorry, you didn't have a co-founder?
No, it's just I was the sole founder. Yeah.
Okay, let's talk about this, and then I want to jump into that.
Yeah.
Okay, so your coping mechanism, you were saying.
And so I remember at some point I started, attending industry events, and I would meet other founders, and I just didn't know what was common. Like, okay, so you met this founder, like, how much can you really tell them? Or they asked you a question about your investor. Do you have to give them? And over time, I started to realize, hey, these other founders are human too. And when you find a collective that you can really trust, they can become your support system. And some of my closest friends to this day are other entrepreneurs that I've met through YPO, that I've met at networking events.
Yeah.
Shane, who we know, I met through PEF. And it is so amazing to have like this ecosystem of people who understand what you're going through, and that you can be very vulnerable and candid about those challenges.
Were you in Forum at YPO?
Yeah, and I'm still in Forum.
Nice.
Yeah.
I was in YPO briefly myself.
Oh, okay. Yeah. Okay. And that has been so helpful for me. Yeah. It's like, it's different than therapy too, because like,
Sure.
Even like therapy, like they haven't done it. Like they don't know what it's like to be in it, to deal with, investor stuff, or to, deal with, a retailer being upset with you about something. That's been a huge part of my coping mechanism.
But you have to proactively go and get it. Like you do. You're kind of talking about it very nonchalantly.
Yeah.
So would you recommend to entrepreneurs to find like
100%? I talk about that all the time. Community and peer groups, people who understand what it is you're going through, is a non-negotiable. You have to.
So my question is how? So when you mentioned YPO, I know what it takes to get into YPO because, as I mentioned, I was in it. So there's a pretty high threshold in terms of criteria to get into YPO. So by the time you got into YPO, Briogeo was already at meaningful scale. Mm-hmm. How about in the early days? What do people do in the early days? How do they find that support group?
Totally. So for me, and I don't like to consider myself a networker because I don't think I like actively, intentionally look to network, but I'm always open-minded about like showing up, like just show up to this event, show up to this, industry dinner. Like I always like am an active participator.
Yeah.
And I really encourage people to find whatever your industry trade thing is. For me, it's, CEW, Cosmetic Executive Women. And you don't have to be of a certain scale to be a part of these things. But when you start putting yourself out there in the right circles, that's how you start to form that network.
And so so right now there's a trend where there's groups, right? So I often use this as an example. I don't know if I mentioned my friend Aaron Spivak to you. Did I mention that name to you?
I don't know. I don't think so.
So Aaron, he recently sold his sleep business. So he did weighted blankets, and eventually he did pillows and mattresses, and he sold it for $48 million. So he did really well with it in 4 years.
Wow.
He's 29 years old.
Amazing.
And he started something called the Founders Club. So, based on his authority, and in Canada, it's one of the, he's Canadian. He did this in Toronto. So it's a huge deal in Toronto. And so he, based on his authority in that space as an e-commerce founder, he started the Founders Club. And he has so many members, and they get together and they do all the, they just network. They go to dinners and they do all kinds of events and stuff. So that's a trend right now.
Totally.
And I mean, I'm jumping on board with it because Larry and I are launching Creator Method, which is this community that we're getting members, and we're doing video calls with them once a week, live events, and we're doing a WhatsApp group. So we're trying to do that. Do you recommend to people? I'm sure that now, whatever business you're in, whatever niche you're in, you can find something like this. You can find somebody. Do you recommend that as an investment? Like, should people be paying to be members in these groups?
Oh, absolutely. Because I also feel like when you pay to be a part of this, it's the motivation too to say, I'm going to show up even though I'm so busy. I'm like paying for this thing.
Yeah.
And when you pay for something, chances are you're going to get more value out of it because that money is going towards something to create that experience for you.
I made big mistakes earlier on. I think I'm like a generation ahead of you, like as an entrepreneur, and I didn't value networking at all. I always worked in a silo, so it was always very difficult. In terms of selling the company, take me through this story. Take me through kind of, it was Wella, which is a global conglomerate. Was it specifically to hair care, or was it personal care in general that they do?
It's primarily hair care, but they also have a nail and tool business also.
So you just got a call one day. It's like, hey, do you want to sell, or how did it work?
Yeah, well, we had started getting interest from different companies about, potentially purchasing Briogeo. And I think for every founder, there comes a point where, you get into this mode of like fundraising hamster wheel, where it's like almost every 18 months, it feels like you have to raise again. And every time you do that, you're obviously diluting your ownership in the company. So you're continuing to work and build, but you're also like lessening what you own. And so when we were getting these calls, I thought, you know what, we should entertain them. Let's hire a banker to really like understand what this means, because I really think it's so important that at the right time to really think about, does it make sense to take an investment, dilute myself, or should I be thinking about a long-term strategic partner who can give us the financial sort of backing, but I can also monetize everything that I've put into this for the past decade or whatever. And so we were getting these inbounds, and we brought in an investment bank to help us, assess it all. And Wella ended up being the right partner for so many different reasons. I think the biggest reason, too, was that our next big stage of growth was going to come from salon. We'd always been a consumer retail brand with Sephora and Ulta, but we were getting...
and D2C.
And D2C, Amazon. And we were getting so many requests over the years from salon stylists about carrying Briogeo, but we just didn't have the resources or expertise to do it on our own, which is another thing. Like, as an entrepreneur, you have to, again, realize what you can sign up for and what you can't. And sometimes you will get lucrative opportunities, but if you don't have the infrastructure to support it, you will not succeed. And so with Wella, it was a strategic opportunity to bring on a partner that could help us build that out. And so actually within the first year of the acquisition, we've entered salon. So we're with Salon Centric. We just launched with BSG this past February, and it's been incredible, like a total like
and
dream
that's through
come
their
true.
Expertise, because they're like in salons.
Yeah. And just, we're still in the infancy stages of leveraging Wella's capabilities. So we've gotten into the ecosystem. And now as we start to scale, that's when we can really start to tap into Wella more.
How many people worked for you at the peak of like number of, how big was Briogeo at the peak? Or maybe it's the peak now?
Yeah, I mean, we've actually always been a pretty like lean team. And I think there's a fine balance between how many people do you need to really support the business, and then what's that number where you start to lose agility because you have too many cooks in the kitchen.
Yeah.
So the highest our organization has been around 70 people. And, for some companies of our size, they're operating with 100 people, some a little less. But I think it depends on your technology. It depends on what you outsource versus insource. It also just depends on like how well your processes run internally, where if things are really efficient, you can do more with less.
Do you ever stop to consider like how wild it is that a company doing the volume that you're doing has only 70 people? Like that sounds like that's pretty crazy, because I have friends who have companies who are I have friends who have companies who in different product verticals who are doing similar revenue, and they also have a similar size team.
Yeah.
And some of them don't even have offices.
Yeah, no, completely. I mean, we were talking about AI, earlier, but we've gotten a lot, just smarter too, just about how we leverage technology to create efficiencies. And I will say the majority of our business is retail. So if we were purely D2C, I think we'd have a much bigger team, because it means that we would be servicing, sort of the full acquisition funnel. But because Sephora and Ulta are doing a lot of that acquisition for us, we don't have to have as big of a team as we would if we were D2C.
You'd also be worth a lot less.
Correct.
Because my understanding is that multiples, enterprise value is determined, and you get much higher multiples on the revenue that's attributed to retail distribution.
Yep. Completely.
Right.
Yep.
Right. Yeah. What was that? Something else I was going to mention about retail. I was speaking with, I'm sure you know the company, and I think I mentioned it to you before, with Michał Bursky. Curlsmith.
Yes, Curlsmith. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. And
what he told me, and I'd love to compare notes with you, he told me that he started with D2C, and his was wild, where he out the gates, he had spent all his money, and he had literally $1,000 to his name, and he paid 5 influencers $200 each to put, but it was very specific because it was for women with textured hair.
Yeah.
So he found small accounts with a couple of thousand followers each, and they were teaching, it was influencers with textured hair teaching other women how to maintain their textured hair. Wow. So it's super and so what he told me is that he was doing D2C, and as soon as he got into retail, all of his efforts, his calls to action, were to go to the store. So as opposed to his call to action being, here's a link and go buy the link on his own website, he would send them all to the store. So and this is I'm just kind of geeking out a little from an industry perspective, but did your strategy kind of change once you got Sephora distribution, where your calls to action was go to the store and buy it versus go to our website and buy it? Because we know that the revenue on, if it's proprietary,
we got our Sephora account very early on, actually within the first 6 months of launching.
Okay, so how did you do
and
that?
So natively, we always were pushing our retailers as our first priority, because they're also big brand builders.
Of course.
They are kind of an instant tap into a consumer population that's really hard to build on your own.
Absolutely. But Nancy, sorry, you said something that is uncanny to me, that within 6 months you got into Sephora. So my understanding, and this is how it is now, maybe 10 years ago when you got into Sephora, it wasn't like that, but my understanding is that it's hard to get into Sephora.
It's so hard to get into Sephora right now.
And they're prioritizing, to my understanding, brands that have either a direct social media presence, or they have an influencer actually having a meaningful presence on their cap table.
Yep.
So in the absence of that influencer 10 years ago,
it was so different 10 years ago.
How did you get into Sephora after 6 months?
There was so much more white space.
Right.
I mean, again, this was actually, it was over 10 years ago. We were the only clean hair care brand at Sephora. They had no clean hair care brands prior to us. They didn't have any brands that were speaking to multiple hair texture types, which is crazy. They didn't have any brands that were sustainable. So all of our packaging is our shampoo and conditioner bottles use PCR resin. So we take old milk jugs and recycle them back into the bottles. And they didn't really have any brands in hair that had a real founder story. And that's what Sephora is so good at, is amplifying the founder story and creating that emotional connection with the consumer. So we checked all of these boxes that now brands who are coming in, I mean, it's just everyone has it together. Right. But it was such a different time back then.
It was less competitive.
Yeah. Yep, less saturated, a lot of white space.
Timing is a lot. Last topic I want to just cover.
Yeah.
Talk to me about legacy. Talk to me about what's next, because I believe financially you're good.
Yeah.
I'll make that statement, which is wonderful. Now things change. Mm-hmm. So now you're not working to try to make even more and more and more. Maybe you are to a certain degree, but for the short time that I've known you, there's something bigger on your horizon. Mm-hmm. The podcast, I understand, is giving back to your community, specifically female founders, which I think is awesome. what's the legacy play now? Because and you're super young. Am I allowed to say how old you are, or is that a secret?
Yeah, I'm 39. Yeah.
So
I think Wikipedia got a hold of that somehow.
Yeah. Well, I did the math. I kind of did it. Well, you mentioned it to me last time when we had lunch, but you're very young. You're very young to have accomplished what you've accomplished. You are now at a point where you've sold your company. What's next for you? Like what mountain are you going to climb next?
So I had a really, really sort of monumental moment happen in March when I announced a grant that has been a really long time
$1 million
in the making. Yeah. I've been mentoring other entrepreneurs for years. And one of the biggest hurdles that people have, even when they get their brands into Sephora, is like, I'm so early. I'm too young to take an institutional investor. I don't have access to friends and family capital. I'm maxed out on my credit cards. I'm at a point now where I'm about to go into Sephora, so I can't keep working my full-time job. I need something to help bridge the gap. And I've heard this story countless times, and it inspired me to create the Dreammakers Founders Grant, which is a $1 million 4-year grant that helps to support underrepresented founders in the consumer space. So beauty, food, beverage, fashion, home, anything in the consumer space. And it really is. It's meant to be like that lifeline to help them get to that next level.
Yeah.
Scale.
Nancy, it's $1 million in total.
Yep. In total.
For a number of different founders.
Yes. A number of different founders. So, we'll be supporting anywhere from, 13 to 15 founders
and these
a
are
year.
Grants.
And these are grants.
So you're not taking equity.
No equity. They don't have to pay them back. And the other part of it too, Gary, is I feel like so much of my success was unlocked when I took some risks. Like I took risks on influencers. I took risks on hires. I took risks on like bold innovation ideas. But it's really hard to take risks when you're pinching pennies and you've got to make sure that every dollar counts.
Yeah.
And that's why I don't want to take any equity, or I don't want them to pay it back, because I want them to take some risks with the money. Do something really bold that you believe in. And if it works, that's awesome. And if it doesn't, you've learned from it and you'll try something new. So that's what it's about.
Yeah. I mean, that to me is the legacy, right? That's the legacy play. Because if you can identifying this challenge that specifically, women have, everybody has it, but specifically the women have in this transitional period and, when they have to make these decisions. And I think it's wonderful. I have a feeling that that's where you're going to get a lot more scale.
Completely.
And then obviously on the venture capital side, you continue to invest in companies.
Yeah.
And do you take advisory positions? I'm assuming you do.
Oh, I do, but very selectively,
right?
Because there's time that comes with that, and time's a commodity, and yeah.
Of course. Nancy, thank you very much. I really appreciate you doing this.
Oh, thank you for having me. This was so fun. I feel like we could just talk for hours.
We can. Well, we will, because you and Stephen are coming over.
Yes.
For the sauna and the cold plunge.
Some good cooking.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. We'll get my mother-in-law to come and make us.
Oh, nice.
Is it Shabbat dinner that we're doing? I think it is.
It's
on
Friday. Saturday.
It's a Saturday. No,
yeah,
it's not a Shabbat
it's like
dinner.
Saturday.
That's okay.
We could do a Shabbat dinner. Should we do a Shabbat dinner?
On Friday night?
Yeah. Actually, Stephen would really love that.
Would he?
Yeah.
Okay. Well, let's figure
it out.
Let's do a Shabbat dinner. The only thing with a Shabbat dinner is then we don't have unless we want to go nighttime sauna and cold plunge.
I'll do it.
All right.
Yeah, let's do it. Let's do it. I mean, it's hot here come late May.
So we have to reschedule then.
Yeah.
We reschedule it for a Friday night.
Yeah. Perfect.
You'll love my mother-in-law. You haven't met her yet. Valeria's mom?
I haven't. I've seen her on Instagram though. Sure. She's like really funny.
She is hilarious. You'll love her. No, she's a character. She's she had Valeria when she was 19.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, she's a real character. No, we love her. Nancy, thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, and I'll see you at Shabbat dinner.
Yeah, see you then.